Imagine leading a team where people are not afraid to speak up, where feedback is honest, trust is strong, and failure is treated as part of growth, not a career-ending mistake. Now imagine how rare that actually feels. Most workplaces talk about courage, but quietly reward silence, compliance, and emotional armor. This book is about dismantling that armor. Dare to Lead is not about being fearless. It is about learning how to show up when fear is guaranteed. Brené Brown spent over 2 decades studying courage, vulnerability, shame, and trust, and this book distills that research into a practical playbook for leaders at every level, whether you manage a company, a classroom, a family, or yourself. Brown begins with a simple but powerful definition. A leader is anyone who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and processes and has the courage to develop that potential. Leadership is not about titles or authority. It is about behavior. Through years of research and interviews with global leaders, she found one clear answer to what modern leadership needs most: courage. Not as a personality trait, but as a set of skills that can be taught, practiced, and measured. Her research revealed 10 common cultural problems in organizations: avoiding tough conversations, fear of failure, lack of trust, perfectionism, disengagement, and ethical avoidance. Beneath all of them lies the same root cause: fear. The solution is not more control, more rules, or more pressure. The solution is courage. Brown introduces the core framework of the book. Courage is built through 4 teachable skill sets: rumbling with vulnerability, living into our values, braving trust, and learning to rise. The rest of the book explores each of these in depth. Part 1. Rumbling with vulnerability. Rumbling with vulnerability is the foundation of daring leadership. Brené Brown makes it clear that without this skill, none of the other leadership abilities can function. Courage is not possible without vulnerability, and leadership without courage quickly becomes control, compliance, or disengagement. Brown defines vulnerability as the emotion we experience during times of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. This definition is critical because it removes vulnerability from the realm of weakness and places it squarely at the center of everyday leadership. Giving honest feedback, admitting a mistake, asking for help, standing up for values, or trying something new, all of these experiences require vulnerability. At the heart of this section is the idea of the rumble. A rumble is not a fight, a debate, or a performance. It is a conversation defined by a willingness to lean into discomfort, stay curious, listen deeply, and own one's part. Rumbling means resisting the urge to shut down, blame, or armor up when things get hard. Instead of trying to win, the goal of a rumble is clarity, truth, and shared understanding. Brown addresses 6 persistent myths that prevent leaders from embracing vulnerability. The most damaging myth is that vulnerability is weakness. Decades of research and thousands of interviews show the opposite. There is no example of courage, personal or professional, that does not involve vulnerability. Brave leaders are not fearless. They are willing to show up despite fear. Another myth is the belief that some people simply do not do vulnerability. Brown explains that vulnerability is unavoidable. The only choice we have is whether we acknowledge it and work with it, or deny it and allow it to unconsciously drive our behavior. When vulnerability is ignored, it often shows up as defensiveness, perfectionism, anger, or disengagement. The myth of going it alone is equally destructive. Humans are wired for connection, not isolation. Leaders who insist on self-sufficiency often cut themselves off from trust, feedback, and collaboration. Real strength comes from interdependence, not rugged individualism. Brown also dismantles the idea that vulnerability can be engineered out of leadership through systems, technology, or processes. While reducing risk in systems is necessary, relational vulnerability cannot be eliminated without eliminating courage itself. Ethical decision-making, innovation, and accountability all require leaders to tolerate uncertainty and emotional exposure. A crucial insight in this part is that trust and vulnerability grow together. Trust is not built first and then rewarded with vulnerability later. Instead, trust is built in small, repeated moments where people choose honesty, care, and reliability. Brown uses the metaphor of the marble jar to show how trust accumulates through everyday actions, not grand gestures. Brown also clarifies an important misunderstanding. Vulnerability is not oversharing. Daring leaders do not disclose everything, nor do they use emotion as a performance. Vulnerability is about being honest, setting boundaries, and creating space for real conversations. Leaders can be deeply vulnerable while sharing very little personal information. Throughout Part 1, Brown emphasizes the concept of armor, the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors we use to protect ourselves from discomfort. Armor shows up as perfectionism, cynicism, blame, control, or emotional shutdown. While armor may reduce short-term pain, it always increases long-term disconnection. Leadership requires recognizing armor and choosing courage instead. Ultimately, Part 1 establishes a powerful truth. Our capacity to lead courageously will never exceed our capacity to be vulnerable. Rumbling with vulnerability is not a soft skill. It is the core leadership skill that makes trust, innovation, and accountability possible. Part 2. Living into our values. In Part 2, Brené Brown shifts from vulnerability to integrity. She argues that values are not what we say we believe, but what we consistently practice. Many leaders and organizations claim a long list of values, but struggle to live them when faced with pressure, fear, or trade-offs. Brown challenges leaders to identify a small number of core values, usually no more than 2, and define what those values look like in action. Without behavioral clarity, values become vague aspirations rather than decision-making tools. Daring leadership requires turning values into lived practices. Integrity, as Brown defines it, is choosing courage over comfort and values over popularity. This means doing the right thing even when it is uncomfortable, unpopular, or personally costly. Leaders who compromise their values to avoid discomfort may gain short-term approval, but they lose trust, credibility, and self-respect over time. A key idea in this section is that values-based leadership simplifies difficult decisions. When values are clear, leaders no longer ask, "What will make people happy?" or "What will protect me?" Instead, they ask, "What is the right thing to do according to our values?" This shift reduces anxiety and increases consistency. Brown also addresses the emotional challenges of living into values. Choosing integrity often brings disappointment, conflict, and self-doubt. Leaders may feel misunderstood, criticized, or isolated. This is where vulnerability and values intersect. Without vulnerability skills, leaders often abandon their values when things get hard. Another important concept in Part 2 is boundaries. Living into values requires setting and respecting boundaries, clear limits that protect what matters most. Boundaries are not punishments. They are expressions of self-respect and clarity. Leaders who fail to set boundaries often experience resentment, burnout, and confusion within their teams. Brown emphasizes that values must be practiced daily, not only during crises. Small choices, how feedback is given, how mistakes are handled, how meetings are run, either reinforce or erode values. Culture is built through repeated behavior, not mission statements. By the end of Part 2, Brown makes it clear that daring leadership is not about charisma or authority. It is about alignment. When leaders live into their values with clarity and courage, they create trust, stability, and meaning for the people they lead. Part 3, Braving Trust. Trust is the connective tissue of daring leadership. Without trust, vulnerability feels unsafe, values feel performative, and courage collapses under pressure. In this part, Brené Brown makes trust practical by breaking it down into observable, teachable behaviors rather than treating it as a vague feeling or personality trait. Brown emphasizes that trust is not built through grand gestures or dramatic moments. It is earned slowly in small, repeated interactions. Every conversation, decision, and response either adds to trust or takes away from it. Leaders do not get to demand trust. They can only model it. To make trust actionable, Brown introduces the Braving Framework, 7 elements that describe what trustworthy behavior looks like in real life. Boundaries come first. Trust requires clear limits. Leaders who are unclear about expectations, roles, or consequences create confusion, resentment, and disengagement. Setting boundaries is not about control or punishment. It is about clarity and respect. When boundaries are respected, people feel safer and more focused. Reliability means doing what you say you will do, consistently and over time. Trust erodes quickly when leaders overpromise, miss deadlines, or change expectations without explanation. Brown highlights the importance of acknowledging limits and saying no when necessary. Reliability is built by choosing consistency over approval. Accountability involves owning mistakes, apologizing, and making amends. Daring leaders do not blame others, hide errors, or pretend nothing happened. Instead, they model responsibility and learning. Accountability strengthens trust when it is paired with empathy rather than shame. The vault refers to confidentiality. Trust cannot exist when information is shared inappropriately or used as leverage. Leaders must be especially vigilant about protecting private conversations and sensitive information. When people believe their words will be shared outside the room, honesty disappears. Integrity means choosing what is right over what is easy, fast, or popular. Brown distinguishes integrity from reputation. Integrity is internal alignment with values, even when no one is watching. Leaders who compromise integrity for convenience slowly drain trust from their teams. Non-judgment is the ability to ask for help and give feedback without fear of ridicule or punishment. When people feel judged, they hide mistakes and stop learning. Leaders who respond with curiosity instead of criticism create environments where growth is possible. Generosity is the final element of trust. It means assuming the most generous interpretation of others' intentions and behaviors. Instead of jumping to blame or suspicion, generous leaders ask questions and seek understanding. Generosity prevents minor issues from becoming relational breakdowns. Brown stresses that trust must flow in all directions. Leaders must trust their teams as much as they expect to be trusted. Micromanagement, secrecy, and emotional distance communicate mistrust, even when intentions are good. Psychological safety is a natural outcome of trust. When people believe they can speak up, admit mistakes, and offer ideas without fear, teams become more innovative, resilient, and engaged. Trust is not about comfort. It is about creating the conditions for honest work. Part 4. Learning to rise. Courage guarantees failure. If leaders are willing to take risks, speak honestly, and challenge the status quo, setbacks are inevitable. Part 4 focuses on resilience, not as toughness or endurance, but as the ability to rise after a fall with integrity and wisdom. Brown explains that most people experience failure in one of 2 unhelpful ways. Either they avoid it entirely, or they are overwhelmed by shame when it happens. Daring leadership requires a different approach, one that treats failure as a source of learning rather than identity. She introduces a 3-part process for rising after a fall. The first step is reckoning. Reckoning means acknowledging the emotions that surface after disappointment, failure, or conflict. Many leaders skip this step, moving straight into problem-solving or blame. Brown argues that unacknowledged emotions do not disappear. They show up later as burnout, reactivity, or disengagement. Reckoning requires honesty about what we are feeling and why. The second step is rumbling with the story we tell ourselves. Humans are meaning-making creatures, and when something goes wrong, we immediately create stories to explain it. These stories often involve blame, self-criticism, or assumptions about others' intentions. Brown encourages leaders to question these narratives, separate facts from interpretations, and stay curious rather than defensive. This rumble often reveals gaps between what actually happened and what we believe happened. By examining these gaps, leaders can replace false narratives with more accurate and compassionate understanding. The third step is revolution. Revolutionizing the way we engage with failure means integrating what we have learned and changing behavior going forward. This is where resilience becomes transformational. Learning to rise is not about bouncing back to who we were before. It is about rising stronger, wiser, and more grounded. Brown highlights the importance of accountability in this process. Rising does not mean excusing mistakes or avoiding responsibility. It means owning our part, repairing trust where needed, and applying lessons deliberately. A central theme in this part is shame resilience. Shame thrives when failure is hidden, ignored, or personalized. Leaders who normalize learning and vulnerability reduce shame's power and increase collective courage. Brown also emphasizes that leaders set the emotional tone for recovery after failure. When leaders respond to mistakes with curiosity, responsibility, and openness, teams follow. When leaders react with blame or avoidance, fear spreads. By the end of Part 4, Brown makes one thing clear. Daring leadership is not defined by never falling. It is defined by the willingness to rise, learn, and re-engage with courage. Resilience is not a personal trait reserved for a few. It is a skill that can be practiced, strengthened, and shared. Daring leadership is not about being perfect. It is about being present, curious, and courageous, especially when it is uncomfortable. Courage is contagious. When leaders show up with vulnerability and integrity, others follow. The ultimate message of Dare to Lead is clear. Brave work, tough conversations, and whole hearts are not optional. They are the future of leadership.